Hey, hello. I just got to mention, we have people going to be watching this online right here, right in front of me. There's people through the camera. Everyone say hi. Just give them a wave. Everyone online, we are so glad that you are here. We're praying for you, friends. And everyone waved, whether you can see them or not. Now, I got a question for you, and I don't want you to answer this out loud, okay? I just want you guys to think about the question and your answer in your head, and here's why I don't want to have to call the cops, okay? Yeah, I don't want to have to call the cops. Exactly. Here's my question. What would you do if you knew that you could get away with anything? If there was no punishment, no consequences, there's no regret, like top 5 things, what would you do? Now just think about it, okay? Now I know some of you are already like thinking Old Testament, like I would sell my brother or sister to slavery in Egypt. And this is why I'm not having you guys say it out loud, because then I might exactly what? I might have to call the cops if some of you guys are thinking about that. Okay, all right. How many, here, we'll start with these questions. How many of you would play video games all night long? Some of you might already do that, but how many of you would play video games all night long? Mom and dad can't say anything about it. You're up 24 hours playing video games. How many of you would take your spend your parents' money, all of it, on like a sneaker collection? How many of you guys are into shoes? Raise your hand. Shoes? Yes. Okay. You could spend all their money on a sneaker collection. How many of you would eat dessert for every meal? I would. 100%. Yes. I love dessert so much. Okay. How many of you guys would take, how did I word this? Take one of everything from your favorite store, like Target. Everything is coming with me. No consequences. You can just take everything, right? Oh, for free. Oh, everything would be gone, okay? How many of you guys would hack into your guys' teacher's computer and give yourself all A's? Yeah, exactly. But you guys won't do that. No way. You guys are good students. You would do that? Okay, well, don't do it, okay? Don't learn how to do it. That's just hypothetical. But I'm sure that you guys would all pretty much have this long list if you knew you could get away with absolutely anything, no consequences, nothing. You would just get away with it. And I'm sure you know that there's nothing worse than having to face the consequence of something that you did wrong, right? How many of you guys know the feeling when you do something wrong, you know you shouldn't be doing it? Maybe you've done something, you've said something, and you just get like this knot in your stomach, and you're like, wait a sec, I'm going to hurl, like I'm going to throw up, I feel sick, I did something so bad, and I feel really, how many of you guys know that feeling? You just, yeah, some of us have experienced, come on, all you guys know what I'm trying to explain. Oh, yeah, you probably felt bad about it. So, I have a story to share, and it's when I'll explain it, but basically, I was in junior high. Listen up. It's kind of a funny story. I was in junior high. I was in your guys' position. I was your guys' age. And I was at school one day. You guys don't even know the teacher, so don't even try and... Anyways, I had this teacher. And she was quite strict in the most odd ways ever. So there's this one time I'm in class. And I got the hiccups. How many of you guys have ever experienced hiccups? Everyone has, right? Right, hiccups, duh. So I get the hiccups, and I'm like trying not to be loud, but I kind of can't control the hiccups. So what happens is she stops teaching, and she says, Emma, can you please stop having your hiccups? You're being a distraction to the class. And I was like, no, like I can't really control that. And she was upset that I could not control my hiccups. And I told her, I can't control my hiccups. She said, everyone can control their hiccups. You better stop. You're being a distraction to the class. And I felt terrible. Like I was like, I wanted to crawl in a hole because I was like, oh my gosh, wait, am I the only one in the world who can't control their hiccups? Because she made me feel so bad and guilty and just horrible. I thought she was going to like call my parents because I was like, wait, can you really not, do people have control over their hiccups? I was so confused, and I left feeling so guilty because I felt bad. She called me a distraction to the class, and I was like, oh my gosh, my friends in the class are going to be so upset at me. Okay, I felt really bad and guilty for my hiccups. Now, you guys have probably been there. Maybe your punishment, I didn't get punished, but I left feeling like I was going to be punished. And maybe you felt the same way. Maybe your punishment and consequence didn't look like mine, right? But I'm sure something similar has happened to you, or you felt guilty in a way for breaking a rule or doing something that you shouldn't have been doing, right? And you've probably left feeling bad about it. Well, guilt is one of those moods or feelings that we experience when we've done something that we know we shouldn't. Now, I couldn't control hiccups, like now I know, right? But it's the shame or the regret or the weight that we feel, and we know we've made a mistake or a choice that's hurt us or someone else. And that feeling can stick with us for a really long time. And guilt necessarily isn't a bad thing. Guilt isn't the problem. It becomes a problem when it becomes part of your identity, becoming who you are, right? So, in my experience, I have learned there are two types of guilt. I'm going to need a volunteer. I'm going to need some help. Who can help me? Raise your hand. Jonathan, you want to come on up? All right, Jonathan, you're going to be up here for a minute. Are you ready? Okay, he's ready. All right, so I've learned that there are two types of guilt. One of them is called false guilt. Everyone say false guilt. All right, give me a minute because I'm going to need to just have this open. Okay, I need you to put this on like a backpack. Just leave it open. Put it on like a backpack. Perfect. One arm. Get your other one in there. Perfect. Amazing. Okay, so the first one is called false guilt. Now, I meant to bring other books, so listen, these are Bibles, and I'm going to be using these as if this is guilt. The Bible is not guilt, okay? This is a really good thing. Just imagine it says another book. This is something called false guilt. So I'm just going to put it in there, okay? Is the backpack kind of heavy already?
Nah, I've had heavier backpacks.
You've had heavier. All right. So come like over here so everyone can see your false guilt. Perfect. All right. This is when we feel guilty about something, but we're not actually guilty about anything. Everyone say false guilt. That is correct. So it's something when you feel guilty about it, but you kind of shouldn't, kind of like the hiccup story. But sometimes we bring this false guilt on ourselves, and we're super hard on ourselves. So we get a lower grade on a test than we wanted. So we feel guilty for that, right? Anyone ever feel that way? Makes you feel so bad. Or we forget to do our chores and mom gets mad and you're like, oh, mom told me to do that like 5 times. I feel really bad. Or I accidentally hurt a friend's feelings, but not on purpose. Or I unintentionally left out a friend in small group. Something like that. We get so overwhelmed with guilt, and we carry this guilt around with us. I'm going to add some more false guilt, okay? I'm just going to put it in there. Is it getting a little bit heavier? No, not really. Yes, it is. It's supposed to get heavy. That's the point. But we feel like we've made a huge mistake, and we beat ourselves up about it because we feel so guilty. And in reality, we don't have to. We didn't have to. We didn't have to carry that guilt because we didn't mean to do the things on purpose. We didn't bring these things on ourselves, right? But false guilt tells us otherwise. And the second kind of guilt is called real guilt. Everyone say real guilt. Right. Okay, this right here is real guilt. Okay, I'm going to put this in there, okay? Just bear with me. Real guilt. We feel guilty because we are guilty. We know that we told that lie, or we cheated on a test, we spread that rumor, we hurt our friend's feeling on purpose, right? We know the thing that we did or said was wrong. We know we hurt someone, and because of that, we feel guilty. But the problem is we're not really sure what to do with the guilt we feel. Some of us try to ignore it. we deny it, and we act as if we did nothing wrong or have nothing to feel guilty about. We do our best to pretend that the guilt just isn't there, right? We try and avoid it. But what I've learned from experiences is that ignoring the guilt only makes it more powerful, right? The guilt just keeps on building. When we give it more time and we spend more time with the guilt, it grows into something much bigger. Let's see how much guilt we can. Is it getting heavy?
Nope.
Yes, it is. It is getting heavy. I tried it. And eventually the weight of the guilt becomes just too much scary. Okay, I'm going to add 2 more guilts to the backpack. Oh, this is heavy. Is it heavy now?
See me crumbling?
Try walking. Is it heavy? Is it heavy?
Nope, not at all.
That's a lie. You're going to be carrying guilt later because you lied. Just kidding.
I've carried heavier bags.
All right, you can drop it. You can put it down. Give it up for Jonathan, everyone. all those. It's okay. You can leave it. Oh, thank you. All right, good job, buddy. But it's when you're carrying all of this guilt on your back, it weighs so much. It's weighing you down. It's making it hard to walk. Your posture's like this, and you're just walking around with it forever. And the truth is that the more that we try to run from the guilt, the more it has the potential to control us, the power to take over us and become the boss of us. And others of us struggle with guilt because honestly, we just don't feel it. We don't recognize it. We do something that we know is wrong and something we shouldn't do, and well, that's kind of just the end of it. We don't feel the guilt. Maybe we get caught and punished and there's a consequence, or maybe we don't. Either way, we don't feel guilty for what we've done, and we don't carry the backpack full of guilt around with us. Some of us maybe even wonder if we should feel bad for not feeling anything, right? I mean, we should feel a little guilty for what we've done, but sometimes we even let our guilt turn into anger. We get mad at ourselves for what we did. We get mad that we got caught. We get mad that we just don't feel guilty enough. We get mad that we can't just do whatever we want without getting a punishment or a consequence. And eventually that anger leads to making more choices, that leads to more guilt just piling on, and the cycle just goes on and on. And here's what I want you to see about guilt. Just like any other emotion, the feeling itself isn't necessarily bad. When we experience guilt, it's a sign to us that something is off, right? Something needs to change. Something needs to be made right within us. And in my opinion, I think that that's a good thing. We need to recognize, like, oh, I feel guilty about this. Is this a wrong? Did I do something wrong? And if so, we got to change it. If we didn't experience guilt, we wouldn't be able to recognize when we need to take a step to make things right. So it's not the guilt itself that I want you to run from. It's letting it control you, push you, boss you around, and believing something that just isn't true about yourself. It's when guilt becomes so great that it weighs you down and controls how you feel and how you act. So I'm going to give you about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes to discuss the next 2 questions. Describe what guilt looks like, and what emoji do you think best describes guilt? So turn to the people next to you and talk about those 2 questions. Ready? Go. All right. So have a seat. We're going to be in the book of Acts and in the book of Romans. And we're learning from a guy named Paul. Everyone say Paul. Now, if anyone was going to carry weight, it was Paul. And I'll explain why. Like a ton of weight and a ton of guilt. Because Paul, he was like the Christian Terminator. Have you guys seen Terminator? Okay, I'm not encouraging you guys to watch it, but if you know what a Terminator is, it's just like a really mean guy who like destroys people. Yeah. Okay, so Paul in his past life, he actually had a different name. His name was Saul. Everyone say Saul. And Saul did really, really bad things, like super terrible things. This guy literally felt in his heart that Christians did not deserve to live. Like Jesus, the idea of Jesus, his name, who Jesus was, his followers, angered him so much. He hated it so much that he would put people in prison if they followed Jesus or even said the name Jesus. He tortured and killed people if they followed Jesus. So friends, if you ever believe that you are so far gone that Jesus can't love you or Jesus can't save you, Paul would be like, are you kidding? Like, I was the worst of the worst. If anyone didn't deserve grace, it was me. And did you know, Paul was so transformed by Jesus that Jesus gave him a new name. So his previous name was what? Saul. But he had an experience that was crazy good with Jesus, and everything changed. Literally, his whole name changed. Like Jesus was like, you are so different and transformed. You're going to be called Paul. So he literally went from being called Saul to being called Paul. He went from killing people and torturing them who had anything to do with Jesus to telling people about Jesus and proclaiming his name. It's like the total opposite. He went from killing and torturing, if anything had to do with Jesus, to loving Jesus so much, telling people about Jesus. He wrote like almost half of the New Testament in the Bible. But don't you think that his past haunted him? Like, he did some really bad things. And after those things, after he was transformed and met Jesus, he was running into a bunch of people who knew what he had done. He was facing the people who he tortured, right? I mean, don't you think that every time he ran in to these people, he came face to face, he must have felt like a thorn in his side because of like just the past haunting, like, oh my gosh, I've tortured you, I'm so sorry. And then he has to come face to face with these people. But the faith that he had in Jesus, he just couldn't hide it. So we are reading out of Acts chapter 22, where Paul tells his past life. And we're starting in verse 4. And this is Paul speaking. And he says, I worked hard and I killed men and women who believed in what I believe in today. Talking about Jesus. I put them in chains. I sent them to prison. The head religious leaders and the leaders of the people can tell you that this is true. I got letters from them to take our Jewish brothers into the city of Damascus. I was going there to put Christians in chains and bring them to Jerusalem, where they would have been beaten. Paul is telling people he was on his way to the city of Damascus to kill people who believed in Jesus, right? He was on his way to go and do this, and Jesus met him on this road, and everything completely changed. Everything. And if we continue to read in verse 6, it says, I was near Damascus. All at once, about noon, I saw a bright light shine from heaven around me. I fell to the ground. A voice said to me, Saul, Saul, why do you work so hard against me? I said, who are you, Lord? He said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, the one that you are working against. And then after this, so this is when he had this encounter with Jesus. We find Paul praying in verse 19, which is crazy. Like, considering the fact that he was killing people who had anything to do with Jesus and beating them, putting them in prison, Paul is praying. Like, what is going on? And this is what he said. He said, Lord, they know that I took Christians out of every Jewish place of worship. I had them beaten and I put them in prison. Paul is like, I can't hide my guilt. This is what I did. He's owning up to what he did. And that's what he's telling Jesus in this verse. And later in verse 23, Paul tells the religious leaders this. He says, brothers, I have lived for God with a heart that has said, I am not guilty to this day. Paul says, I live for a God that says, I am not guilty for what I've done. He doesn't distance himself from the past, right? He doesn't avoid it. He doesn't run away or deny it or hide. He doesn't make excuses. He's like honest. He's like, look, this is what I used to do. And because of his transformation by Jesus, Paul writes a letter telling us in Romans 8, he says this, so now there is no condemnation for those who belong to Jesus. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin that leads to death. One of the reasons why we don't want to deal with our mistakes or mess-ups or sins is because it leaves us feeling condemned. Now, probably this is not a word that you guys use every day, but that word basically just means guilty. It's guilt that is so big and so heavy, right? Like the backpack with all the guilt. And it's so overwhelming that you just can't get out of it. You don't know what to do. Guilt that makes you believe you'll always be defined by what you've done. The kind of guilt that weighs you down and holds you back. But immediately in this passage, Paul said that it doesn't have to be this way. He says, so now there's no condemnation for those who belong to Jesus. Paul said, if you believe in Jesus, there's no more guilt. There's not even your guilt that feels so big, nothing can keep you from Jesus. There is no guilt too heavy or guilt that just weighs so much that could keep you from Jesus. Why? Because Jesus has set you free. And Paul finished with saying this, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power that leads to death. When Jesus came to earth and died on a cross, he took the weight of all of our mistakes with him. He put on everyone's backpack. Okay, every single person living on this earth, he put it all on his back, took it to the cross. He took the power of those mistakes, which leads to death, and instead, Jesus gave us the power of his Spirit, a power that is life-giving, and that power is far more stronger and far more powerful than any guilt that you'll ever feel. Because of what Jesus did for you, guilt does not have to be the boss of you. Paul experienced this firsthand. Because of Jesus, Paul was able to step out of the guilt of all the things that he'd done in the past. What you've done or whatever you've done, whatever you've said, none of that can define you. What Jesus did on the cross out of love is what defines each one of you. If you allow it, guilt will tell you, stay away from church. Don't go to church. You're too guilty. It'll tell you to hide what you've done and to cover up your mistakes and to keep carrying that guilt. It will lead you not to ask for forgiveness and keep ignoring the guilt and just you'll be hopeful that it'll go away, but it won't. But Jesus gives us a different option. He gives us a chance to start over every day. He gives us grace and he gives us freedom. And this is not a free pass to do whatever we want. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. But it's a new way to look at the mistakes that you've made, a freedom to just try again, a way to not be weighed down by the feeling of guilt. Guilt does not have to be the boss of you. So, because we find freedom from guilt when we follow Jesus, here's what I want you to know. It's 3 things. The first thing is this. You can stop being so hard on yourself and others. Because the truth is that there's grace. Paul says you're not allowed to condemn yourself. Why? Because you don't have that power to actually put that much guilt on you. That's not your job. It's not your job to condemn yourself or other people. Instead, you can embrace the grace that Jesus gives you to live guilt-free and be a person who embraces other people and offers grace too. Here's the second thing. This one's super important. Your guilt will remind you, but it will not define you. Guilt doesn't disappear, right? Paul kept bringing up his guilt even after he was transformed by Jesus. Guilt doesn't just delete itself from everyone's mind, right? So let the thing that happened in the past mark what happens in the future. The choices that you make, let that mark what happens in your future. Guilt can remind us of the path that we've once walked before, and it can help us not to go back down that path. That's why we kind of remember it, but it doesn't get the final say in who you are. It does not have the power to define you. Jesus does. And here's the third thing. You are free to make it right. This one's super hard. You've got to humble yourself before the person that you might have hurt, right? And all you've got to do is say, I've messed up and I'm so sorry for what I've done. All you have to do is apologize and ask for forgiveness to try and do better next time. So remember this, guilt does not have to be the boss of you. And you guys have one more discussion. I think you have 3 more questions. Okay, you'll get like 2 minutes. Answer them quickly. It's kind of about the story of Paul, okay? So let's answer these 3 with the people around us. Ready? Go. So guilt does not have to be the boss of you. Jesus came to change your past and free you of your guilt. Our past can remind us, but it cannot define us. Our past can remind us, but it cannot define us. Because of Jesus, you are renewed and you are set free. And I know that I say this a lot. I think I used it last week, and I'm pretty sure I've used it last year. But Jesus does not stand with his arms crossed. When you've done something wrong or you've said something wrong and you're guilty, he doesn't stand there with his arms crossed looking at you like, what am I going to do with you? You did it again. I'm going to let you feel the guilt. No, Jesus is arms stretched out on a cross saying, come, bring your guilt. I know what you've done. It's okay, but I'm here. I've taken the weight of your guilt. You don't have to feel that or live that way. You can live guilt-free if you come to me. He embraces you, offering you to live guilt-free. And guys, this wraps up our series on anger, fear, and guilt. And the idea that emotions and our moods don't have to be the boss of you. They don't have to define you. Now, each of you, when you came in, I see a few on the floor, so just make sure to pick them up. But you guys got a sheet that says my prayer or something like that. What I want you to do is I want you to take it home tonight. I want you guys to do it because I want you to come back and tell me and tell your guys' leader. I want you guys to fill it out. And it's about guilt and it's a prayer. And I want it to be your prayer over yourself for the next week or keep it forever, whatever you'd like. Sound good? And then also make sure you guys get your daily devos. If you need a new one, they're at the cart before you guys leave. And come back, tell me what your guys' favorite one is. But that wraps up our series. Emotions do not have to be the boss of you. Let's pray. God, thank you that we don't have to be defined by our emotions, that we don't have to live angry, we don't have to live in fear, and we don't have to feel the guilt. Jesus, would we allow you to define us and our identity? God, we thank you that you embrace us and you offer life guilt-free. May we embrace that and may we offer that to our friends and our family. We love you and we praise you. Amen. All right, guys, see you next week for our new series.